I choose to walk in the spirit. It's difficult dealing with all of the ignorance. But in the Bible, it's still talking about the Bible. What is the benefit? Everything about you counterfeit. There ain't no rebuttal you can counter with. On the internet, you the master teacher. In real life, you powerless. Keep it real with you, I don't have time for this. I ride for this, my forefathers died for this. They cry for this opportunity, presently I possess. And right now, you are the opposite. If you walk in love, you fulfill the law. Don't get involved and you ain't giving it all. If you ever think it's cool to threaten another man's family, then you already lost. Chemtrails got aluminum, heavy metal saturate the atmosphere. Manhattan Project, time travel, Mandela effect, what happened here? GMO food processing to the whole world become obsolete. A black man who believes in Jesus got my own team taking shots at me. You trespassing on property that you don't fully understand properly. All the back and forth, that's not for me, that's for ROC and the War Machine. If we ride together, then we ride together. If we can't do it, I'd rather leave. I still stand on the word of God till the day I die and no longer breathe. We trapped inside the diaspora, nightmares of the massacre. Cold sweat, I'm below deck in the middle passage, just a passenger. Revolutionary hardcore, liberation, that's a hard job. You ain't ready, you a oddball. Keep your mouth closed like lockjaw. I learned trying to bring people together on the same page, make them separate. All the talk about reconciliation, when the time come, you hesitate. If Jesus was able to sit at the table with a bunch of sinners, you very fake. Your steps ordered by the Lord, and how it was yesterday, your big mistake. We the city sitting on the hill. Guess it all depends on how you live. Guess it all depends on how you feel, and we both know that ain't God's will. I stood on what I felt was right. I don't never question if God's real. Trapped inside this matrix, I'm about to pop the red and the blue pill.
Bless them which persecute you. Bless and curse not. Rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep. Be of the same mind one toward another. Mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Be not wise in your own conceits. Recompense to no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, said the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12:14-21.
Peace. What it is, it's your brother Tyvon Swainell, aka the Orthodox Moore, aka Brother Moore. This is part 2, real quick, family. I need to send this out to my family right quick. Y'all are sitting with me as I get through my own catharsis right now, because I got some stuff I got to get out my own system and spirit, because a lot of this stuff wasn't sitting with me correctly. And something that's not quite sitting with me correctly is this false dichotomy picture getting painted for people on a consistent basis through the lens of urban apologetics. And so that's something I'm going to try to talk about real quick. And so y'all see what it is on the title or whatnot. Earlier, I was talking about signs and wonders and the fact that they're kind of being unofficially mentored by people like Vocab and whatnot, and picking up a lot of what they get from Vocab. And so something that's very intriguing is Vocab tries to stay out of the genetics conversation in terms of the people I know, because the people I know are real serious about genetics. But Vocab likes to jump into the genetics conversation with so-called BHIs because they don't deal with the genetic component of things. And so for people like Nick who don't know any better, and for people like Joe, so on the previous live stream, Joe and Nick were literally in denial of the fact that there could be any West African Israelite presence. And Vocab is saying nothing to clear this up. So on top of that, I want y'all to see what Vocab is saying about Israelite genetics to these people and what he's not clearing up. I want to be very clear about that, because there's Israelites who do deal with genetics that Vocab is very well aware of and has been aware of for a very long time. And so I'm going to keep saying Vocab knows better. Vocab knows better. Vocab's choosing to paint this false dichotomy by not giving all the sides to the position, all sides to the issue, and all positions that they're equal light or whatnot. Particularly to young people in the game like Nick, who don't know much about apologetics or whatnot, who look to people like Vocab as like the godfather of the Hebrew Israelite concept, or the apologetics going to them and whatnot. And so it's really important that people like Vocab paint a proper picture and at least be upfront about their biases and whatnot. So I'm gonna play the video. Let y'all hear what it is. And I want to see y'all. Let me know if y'all hear Vocab touch on Afro-Asiatic genetics in this whole thing, right? So, for instance, a lot of people who watch this channel, who watch Yap, who watch a lot of other channels like Genesis 49, they're familiar with the Natufian conversation. They're familiar with concepts of certain West African DNA being found in the Levant, etc., or amongst all Jewry, etc. Those kind of things don't get brought up. And that nuance is important because people like Nick and Joe are walking away understanding, or with the understanding, that there's no Israelite presence in West Africa, historically or genetically or anything like that. So when my man Gideon in the previous video was saying, don't call me a black Hebrew Israelite, I find that racist, etc., please call me just an Israelite or a son of Israel, whatever. My man Joe said, no, I'm going to call you a black Hebrew Israelite because I reject your claim of what you're trying to prove. I reject your claim of what you're trying to prove. And when Gideon said that there was historically Israelite presence in West Africa, Joe said, well, there's nothing in the scriptures that proves that. And asked my man to prove the stuff, right? And then threw it on Vocab. And Vocab didn't want it again. And when that conversation came up with Anonymous, Vocab didn't want to touch that, which was not fair to people like Nick and Joe, because they need to hear that argument. They need to hear, what does it sound like when someone makes a cogent argument for the historical presence of Israelites in West Africa and a cogent argument for the genetic signature thereof? A cogent argument, like a clear argument for such. But Nick and Joe aren't hearing that. They're getting half of a false dichotomy, which is it's sad because we're seeing the fruits of that. It allows people who want to look down on people and be exclusionary. It allows them to jump in this apologetics game. Like, I'm not down for skin doctrine at any level, on either side. At either side. I get on Israelites for that junk, right? I get on Christians for that stuff, or Gentiles, however you want to look at it, right? I get on Muslims for that. I get on atheists for that. I'm equal opportunity when it comes to skin doctrine. I'm equal opportunity when it comes to pointing out racial insensitivities and people being tone deaf to the concepts. But this is something that people really need to take stock in. So if Vocab Malone is going to drive this car of Hebrew Israelism, like he runs this thing, right? Like he's the top dog. Then my G is he has the responsibility of making the arguments clear as to what everybody believes in this thing, right? Now, for his model, he likes to focus on the so-called one Westers and tries to pigeonhole everybody into that concept when nobody's looking. But when people like Anonymous or me or Zadok or someone else shows up who can keep him accountable, he switches up, but doesn't tell the people he's switching up. So like when Anon comes on, he starts calling Anon a Hebrew Israelite. He doesn't call him a BHI. But he also doesn't correct Joe when Joe's like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to call you a BHI, even though you don't want to be called one. Gideon. I'm going to call you that because I'm going to call you that because I reject your claim out of hand. So that's on the doctrinal side. Now we're going to get on the scientific side about the genetics and see what kind of information is coming out from this, right? It's coming out from Vocab, Two Signs and Wonders, and what they're understanding and how that plays into how they understand who the real Jews are. Because on the one hand, he'll say that the Nick will say, "Oh, I believe Jews can be all colors," but then again, they don't believe the Jews could be West African. They can be any color, but they can't be West African. Let's find out if Vocab gives any credence to their belief on that, or if he gives them information that counters their belief on that. Hold on real quick. Y'all know what it is.
Okay, guys, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for waiting patiently. We have with us again Vocab Malone, and he brought G-Con with him, so that's awesome. Dr. Joe up in the corner is going to be hanging out and listening, and I'm basically just going to be keeping time and stuff like that. So, yeah, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Vocab, G-Con, Joe. And I think we're going to talk about genetics tonight. If anybody would like to join the show, I'll put my email in the chat, and I'll give you guys a link, and later we can have some people come on and talk. All right. So yeah, Vocab, go ahead, man. I'll let you take it away and start a little opening. Well,
first, I just want to say shout out to G-Con. I feel like it's been a while since we've done something together, man.
Yeah, it's been a little minute. What's going on, bro?
Nothing much. We always talk in the back chat though. And yeah, shout out to Pastor Joe and Nick. Thanks. Real quick, before we kind of present some stuff, G-Con, can you tell people where to find your stuff, so they know where you are and all that?
All right, so you can go check me out. Type in G and then consciousness. It's not spelled with a C, it's spelled with a K. Or Google me, and I should pull up, and it'll point me back to my YouTube page. That's one of the best ways you can find me. Or, just type in LaRon Campbell on Facebook, and you can find me, you know what I'm saying?
Or you could just go in my description, guys. I'll put a link to his channel right in this video, too. So, and same with Vocab's channel. And Joe, you don't have a YouTube channel, do you?
I do. It's under my name, Joe Y. Ross.
Do you want me to link it in the description?
No, not unless they come in to listen to sermons, because I've already been called an Esau, Edomite on there.
Yeah, that's why I haven't, guys. I've had a few people say, "How come you don't have Joe's link in there?" And it's like they're saying I'm being rude or something. It's like because he doesn't want it linked in there. So
come listen to the sermons, Metro Praise International. Other than that, leave that stuff right here.
Cool.
Yeah, I understand that. That's all right, Pastor Joe. One day, probably none of us will have YouTube channels anymore. You know what I mean? In the sense that they'll kick us all off, probably. But anyways, all right. Well, G-Con's really he talked about genetics and stuff a lot. He's really good on it, and has spoken on it a lot. And it's always good to hear him. And I haven't talked that much about the genetic issues really in public yet. With too much, as far as too much. Tonight, we're going to kind of do that a little bit. G-Con and myself, we're going to basically just present some things together, real casual. And then at the end, talk to whoever wants to talk to us about it, obviously, including the host and co-host of the show. So with that, I'll say a few things here. And then G-Con, obviously, whenever he wants to say whatever he wants to say, I step back and let him say whatever he would like to say. So let's talk a little bit about the issue of Jewish DNA or Jewish genetics. And this is not something that I was trying to jump into as a Christian apologist, but part of the challenge is whenever you discuss all the important things you want to discuss, a lot of Hebrew Israelites, unfortunately, they want to discuss other things. You trying to discuss the Bible is what I mean. And then they want to discuss genetics. And then if you avoid it, it's like, oh, well, that's because you don't have the truth or something like that.
What do you call it? What do you call it, Vocab? Hebrew hopscotch?
I use Hebrew hopscotch a little more particular. It's when they can't stay in a passage. So it's not just their tendency to have ADHD. I have another term for that. I call it ADHD, and I call it attention deficit hue disorder. So no matter what you're talking about, they talk about color. attention deficit hue disorder. But Hebrew hopscotch is where they will not stay in a passage with any depth. They'll read part of a verse and then jump to some other verse without really going through the flow of a passage. Like, I've never seen anyone be able to walk a Hebrews like all the way through Romans 9 through 11 and sit in it, you know? So that's a Hebrew hopscotch idea. So let's talk a little bit about this Jewish DNA and all that. Okay, so for some reason, the Hebrewites have this thought, this attitude that it's not just that they need to be Israelites themselves. They need to be considered Hebrew themselves. For whatever reason, it's like they think that the pie is only so big. And what I mean by that is they have to likewise take away the piece of the pie of most modern claimants to any type of modern Jewish identity. It's not just they want in, they want people out. And it's funny because I hold a covenant theology, which I know everyone doesn't, like G-Con doesn't, as far as that kind of progressive covenant theology. However, they'll accuse like someone like me of replacement theology. But Hebrew Israelism is really the ultimate replacement theology. It actually is replacement theology, not just using that as a slur, which is kind of the way they used to describe my position and people like me, because they're literally saying, hey, it ain't none of y'all. It's us, right? And so let's go and look at some issues about some Jewish genetic studies. And I'm going to start with two key studies here. And these are very fascinating studies that were done. I'm going to give you the sources, and then you'll be able to find the links as well for yourself. And this is in relationship to something called the Cohen modal haplotype. Sometimes in the literature, you will see what I'm talking about here abbreviated as CMH, Cohen modal haplotype. And here, I'm going to bring up some Bible verses in a second, so I'm going there right now. Okay, let me have those. I want to have those on deck. Okay, and so here we are looking at two studies. Now, it's estimated that out of 7 million Jewish 50,000.
Do you have? Do you want to share your screen maybe so the people can see it or no?
Not yet. Maybe when I do some other stuff later. So yeah. Not. I don't have anything necessarily yet. But thank you.
I thought you were just reading something off the internet there.
Well, I have notes, but I don't have like a. I don't have like a PowerPoint. I'm not, and I have like these are my own sort of shorthand notes. So it wouldn't make sense to most people trying to look at it. But 5%, 7 million Jewish males are considered Kohanim, and that's the plural of Kohen, and that just basically means of the priestly line. It means descended from Aaron, and there's about 350,000 males that have that. So this is passed through the paternal side, the male descendants directly. And there's some stats that will give you lower, like maybe 2 to 3, but it's somewhere in that range, 2 to 5%, which would be about 7 million. And here's how some of that come about. This is very interesting. So previous generations of historians did not really have access to, in a manner speaking, the history book that everybody carries around inside themselves, which is their genes. Historians did not have access to this prior. Now, historians who want to talk about some of these questions, asking certain questions about population groups, have access. And this really began, you begin to see this really in the 90s, especially the late 90s. And now you'll find this whenever it's necessary, historians interacting with genetic evidence, genetic questions. And it's a fascinating thing that's emerged. So the first paper I'm going to refer to that's based upon a study is from Nature, prestigious British journal there, volume 385, January 2nd, 1997. The title of this is Y Chromosomes of Jewish Priests by Michael F. Hammer. He's down there in Tucson, Arizona, which, poor Tucson, that's our second biggest city, but it's a sad, dusty town. Carl Skrorecki and Robert Bradman. They took 188 Jewish males, and they contributed genetic samples. They were from England, Israel, and North America. And then they were out also, if they were contributors, they were asked to describe their background, if they were a Kohen, Levi, or an Israelite. And from the analysis of this, they wanted to compare people who describes themselves or thought in some way based upon their last name, for example, like Cohen or Rappaport, they wanted to compare that to other people who were considered to be Jews, compare the non-Cohen with the Cohen. And here's what's fascinating from this first study I'm talking about. 2 markers emerged. That's the study. That's it right there. 2 markers emerge from analysis of the Y chromosome markers. The first thing was this thing called YAP negative. YAP negative. It stands for Y chromosome allele polymorphism. It's an insert sequence. And since it's YAP negative, that title denotes the absence of it. So it does not have the Y chromosome allele polymorphism insert sequence because it's YAP negative. The second was something that was a microsatellite repeat marker called DYS19. And here's what's fascinating. Out of 98.5 the Cohenine, remember there's 188 for this particular sample size. 98.5 had YAP, which means which is a fascinating thing, and that's significantly lower than in non-Cohenine. Now, some of that sounds a little confusing. The point is, 2 things emerged that were different out of the Cohenine population from the larger Jewish population, and things that some had and then things that didn't have. But they weren't going to stop there, right? So more research had to be done. And so there's a second research paper that I'm going to point you to. It's from July 9th, 1998, Nature, volume 394. The title of this is Origins of Old Testament Priests. Origins of Old Testament Priests. This is by Mark Thomas. Again, this man, Carl Skrokrecki, Chaim Ben Ami, Tudor Parfit, familiar name, a lot of people know, Neil Bradman, and David B. Goldstein. And they found more information. Here's what they found in this. And this one, if you want to show this one on the screen as well, it's Origins of Old Testament Priests, Nature, volume 394, from July 1998. Origins of Old Testament Priests, Nature, volume 394. You should be able to find an abstract of it there. You may have to put a little more information, like put Nature or July 1998, something like that. Let's see what pops up. Or maybe the name. If you put like David Goldstein, Tudor Parfit, I believe I see it. I believe I see it right there. It looks like you see it right there. Yeah, that's what it looked like.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
so
yeah,
from
okay.
that, here's what
There
they
we go.
found. And, you can look at these. We're showing you what they are. They found a particular array of 6 chromosomal markers. This particular array was in 97 of the 106 Cohenine tested. Now, this is important. I'm gonna stop here for a second to try to explain this. First of all, understand when we talk about the Cohen modal haplotype, sometimes people think, oh, that's like a gene. It's like the gene of Aaron. That's not what it is. It's a combination of neutral mutations that indicate a common lineage. Basically, it's not a Cohen gene. It's not the gene of Aaron. It's the Cohen genetic signature. And what's interesting about it is there are other Jews besides the Cohenim who have it, and Middle Eastern non-Jews who also carry it. So this is somewhat present in some Arab populations. So what does that show? This is really a marker of the ancient Hebrews. Most likely the marker of the shared patriarch. That's why this unique thing is in non-Jews who are of Arab descent as well, because they have a common patriarch there. But it's preserved in higher percentages within Cohenim. And here's why. If you could show on the screen Exodus chapter 40, verse 15.
Yep.
Exodus 40, 15. And again, G-Con, anytime you want to interrupt or cut off, I know you'll be able to follow up. You got all kinds of stuff. But anytime you want to be like, well, let me add something, you can, G-Con. If you,
For sure.
He's not muted or anything, is he? He's
Go ahead, brother.
okay.
He muted himself.
Okay, I got you. I'll read this while you're going there. I got the ESV up.
Go to 15.
Exodus 40, verse 15. Anoint them. Well, actually, let me start just a tad bit here before here.
Sure.
Let me start like in verse. Let me start in verse 12.
Okay.
Then you shall bring Aaron and his sons to the entrance of the tent of meeting, and shall wash them with water, and put on Aaron the holy garments. And you shall anoint him and consecrate him, that he may serve me as priest. Here's the key. You shall bring his sons also and put coats on them and anoint them as you anointed their father, that they may serve me as priests. And their anointing shall admit them to a perpetual priesthood throughout their generations. Now, stop there for a second. Theologically, to fully have a full grasp of this, because we got to put our Bibles together, old and new, we need to go to the book of Hebrews. Now, we're not going to go there now because that would take us sort of afield. But to understand how does a command or injunction like this function within our current context, which is a new covenant context, right? To understand that, Hebrews is key for that. Okay, it's very key. It literally specifically talks about this issue. But we see the command of Yahweh to Israel here, and it's important. Their anointing shall admit them to a perpetual priesthood. So this is Aaron and his sons. So this is passed on through the male line. And here's also what's fascinating. And we're not done with the results, but an interesting thing that shows is over the centuries, a relatively high rate of fidelity among the Jewish wives, or the wives, whatever they were, of these sons of Aaron, or descendants of Aaron, rather, who a lot of times end up with names indicating that. Now, they don't always, but they do sometimes, and it's fascinating. Sometimes they just have stories passed down from their family. Sometimes they pan out, sometimes they don't, right? That's what the testing here is about. But going back to the second study. Wait. But since you got the Bible up, let me show one other verse, because I'm trying to relate the science with why it's relevant. Could you go to Deuteronomy chapter 18? I'm sorry, you got the Bible up. We should probably go to this one other verse. Deuteronomy chapter 18. And
that's okay. I don't mind, bro.
Focus on verse 5, but I'll start reading before you get there. I'm going to start with verse 1, but focus on verse 5. The Levitical priest, all the tribe of Levi, shall have no portion or inheritance with Israel. That's fascinating, by the way, because that's saying that those who are Levites, these are the descendants of Aaron, right? They're not going to have a part of the land. That's interesting because the Hebrew Israelites got Levi and Haiti. They've got them part of the land. Now they might say, well, it's not in Israel, that's in the diaspora. Still, it's just weird. They should be spread out amongst them. You know what I'm saying? They shall eat the Lord's food offerings as their inheritance. They shall have no inheritance among their brothers. The Lord is their inheritance. And by the way, this shows really God's intention. This is really now the portion of all Christians. God is our inheritance through Christ. See, it's a beautiful thing there. Sometimes people miss that, right? And that's fascinating because the Bible says in 1 Peter that now we Christians are priests. From those offering a sacrifice, whether ox or sheep, they shall give to the priest the shoulder and the two cheeks and the stomach. Shoulder of an ox, that's a what is that a ribeye? What is that part? That's a good part to use though for a Philly cheesesteak, by the way, is what I've heard. Okay, the first fruits of your grain, of your wine, and of your oil, first fleece of your sheep, you shall give him. For the Lord your God has chosen him out of all your tribes to stand and minister in the name of the Lord, him and his son for all time. By the way, notice here again, you actually see God's choosing of Aaron, just like God's choosing of Abraham or Israel. It's not based upon Aaron. I mean, Aaron did all kinds of stuff, and as you're going to see his sons will too. It's based upon God saying, look, this is because I choose this, right? It's very just fascinating to see the way God's grace and is moving with his people. It's a beautiful thing to see. He's a giving God. And if a Levite comes from any of your towns out of all Israel where he lives, and he may come when he desires to the place the Lord will choose, and ministers in the name of the Lord his God, like his fellow Levites stand and minister before the Lord, then he may have an equal portion deep besides what he receives from the sale of patrimony. Okay, just showing that this is supposed to be a continued thing. And even through the diaspora, it appears that there was still some connection, and really because the DNA doesn't get it doesn't get lost because we're tracing it through the male side. You see what I'm saying? So in theory, going back all the way to Aaron, which we're going to talk about here a little bit more in a second, because it's on the male side strictly. It's paternal, not maternal, that we're discussing here. It's very, very important as well. And you even see today, like in the synagogues, they'll sometimes do something called the priestly blessing. They read, I believe, a portion out of Leviticus, and it's like the split fingers. And some people know this, some people don't. But Leonard Nimoy, who is a Jewish extract, who played Spock in Star Trek, the original series, he improvised that for Spock's character as a Vulcan greeting. He would split apart, live long and prosper. And if you think about it, the live long and prosper line is similar to the Levitical priesthood blessing that the priests actually give. That's where he got it. It's out of his Jewish background. It's a fascinating little tidbit relating to Star Trek that relates out of this issue. It's a very fascinating thing. Now, let's go back if we could to that study, because I'm going to be talking about the other things they found from that study, origins of Old Testament priests there, and reiterating that they found a particular array of 6 chromosomal markers that was in 97 of the 106 who were tested. Right, the chances of this are less than 1 in 10,000. And here's what's wild. There's a common set of genetic markers in both Sephardi and Ashkenazi alike when it comes to the Kohanim worldwide. And since it's worldwide, it indicates a common origin predating the split of these two communities, which is said to be around 1000 AD. But here's what's crazy. It's not just Sephardi and Ashkenazi. Now, this is going a little bit outside of the test, what I'm talking about right now. These are subsequent tests. Origins of Old Testament priests. That's the test I'm discussing right now. I don't know if you can put that back on the screen, the abstract of it, so people know what we're discussing. But here's what's wild. They did this later on, and Tudor Parfit was directly related to this, and I could tell the story about that. It's a fascinating thing. They did this later on as well with the Buba clan of the Limba. So the Limba are from South Africa and Zimbabwe. And basically they told Tudor Parfit, hey, they were in South Africa when this happened. Hey, we're also Israelites. We heard you've been working with these different communities and whatever, and hey, we're also, and so come check us out over here. We have oral traditions and you'll believe us. And Tudor Parfit, he's kind of he's like seems like he's like a moderate Anglican, he's like, really, he's skeptical is my point by saying that. But he goes over there and they end up doing the testing, and it ends up that the identical percentage of by some accounts, identical percentage of those who have this Cohen modal haplotype was present in the male side of the Buba clan, which it ended up being 52%, according to Parfit, 52% on the male, kind of like their priestly class that they had, the Buba clan. So it's out of one of all the groups they had. So it's not all the Limba. Sometimes people talk about the Limba and they're like, well, the Limba. Well, the evidence is there from the Buba clan specifically. That's where the testing has been to my knowledge. I don't know about all the whole larger population of the Limba, but it's within the Buba clan, certainly. And it matches Sephardi and Ashkenazi populations. It's almost unbelievable. So you have these folks who are all over the world, because there was a scattering according to Deuteronomy 33, chapter 30, verse 3, and 2864, that scattering happened. And even though Jews make up less than 0.25% of the world's population, there have been historically almost everywhere, all over the globe. And the fascinating thing is then they end up having these genetic markers, regardless of the phenotype. And the phenotype is the way you look and can change, because our DNA differences are a very small percentage. We match up, almost every single one of us matches up. The most interesting things, though, there, of course, is in the differences that we have between each other. But it's so small. That's why somebody can look like whatever, basically, and still have these genetic markers underlying. So the Limba look like other Bantu-speaking peoples, relatively speaking. The Ashkenazi look, relatively speaking, like other Eastern Europeans. The Sephardi look, relatively speaking, like other North African Jews and Spaniard Jews. And yet they have these things. And it's not just them. There's another community that's interesting that I'm just learning about today, a much smaller community. Say what?
The Samaritans, Kohanim has it too.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. Can you say a little more something about that? Because I feel like I feel like the Samaritans get left out of the conversation a lot. I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but thank you so much for bringing that up.
Yeah, so what happens is when you look at the Samaritan, among the Kohanim, they realize that whatever group that they're in, whatever Jews that there is, among the Kohanim, the priests, they all have this marker, which is a J1C3 marker, or J1, which they call, I think it comes from the J subclad. So then the Samaritans also have J1 and J2 markers. Now these markers originated outside of Africa. So then when you look at, like he said, the Buba tribe, and they have these markers, then you begin to see that they themselves, now it's not necessarily a Jew marker, but what it is it's a marker. It shows that they have close relationships, shared genetics with each other, real close, and it's been consistent, constant. So they can look at the rate between of this mutation that they see, and look at the mutation to say that this can date back, because they believe that it's constant. It can date back to a specific ancestor, the closest ancestor that they had. And so when they did the rating, like you said, it came all the way back to the times of when Aaron and them would have been looked at. And so that's how they're looking at these things. But a lot of these groups that are Jews have this marker, and this is an out of Africa marker. And one of the things that we look at, which we're going to talk about, but I'm going to let them finish, is that a lot of African Americans that say that they basically are Jews or Israelites don't have a lot of out of African markers, and when they do, they have European, like probably R1B or something like that, which European Jews have R1B2, but they also have autosomally traced back to the Middle Eastern and have mutations at a high level on their chromosomes. And so when you look at what he's saying here is that this is similar with a lot of other Jews. And so if you're saying you're an Israelite, we know geographically certain mutations picked up, certain haplogroups came along, subclads that's outside of Africa, that's in those areas where biblically Israelites would have came from. Why is it that you're saying that you're an Israelite and you're an African American, but you don't have those markers? You don't have none of those markers, and so that's what we're looking at, and what we want to get to later on farther into some studies, especially about the Ashkenazis. But definitely, there's many other groups that also have this marker just as well, J1C3 marker, and which they could named it as the Cohen marker, basically.
Yeah, and again, I'm glad you brought up the Samaritans, because a lot of times they get left out, and it's true they're mixed, if people want to say that, but I mean, everybody is, including the populations we're studying. To kind of put I'm going to go back to that study briefly, but to put a scholar's like response on it, so people can kind of understand. He basically, because I like this scholar, Dr. Harry Oster, he's written a really good book on the topic as well. He has a quote about this, and he has a good book I recommend people get. It's called Legacy: A Genetic History of the Jewish People. It's on Oxford. It's a really important book to if you're really trying to get into this. And here's what he says. He's the chairman of the Human Genetics Program at New York University School of Medicine, by the way. Quote, recent work from genetics labs has validated the biblical record of a Semitic people who chose a Jewish way of life several thousand years ago. These observations are the biological equivalent to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, suggesting that despite 2,000 years of diaspora, the relatedness of the Jews of Eastern European, Ashkenazim, North African, Sephardim, and Middle Eastern, Oriental origin can be demonstrated by genetic marker analysis. It's an amazing thing. And just like G-Con said, this most recent common ancestor, who it looks like for all intents and purposes is Aaron, dates back as far as sort of the genetic clock that they can kind of use 3,300 years. That's the approximate time. And this is based upon the variation of the mutations among Kohanim today. And then they kind of look at the time frame, and it yields 106 generations away from the most recent common ancestor. That's 3,300 years. That's around the time of the Exodus. So there's somewhat of a margin of error here, but it's actually an interesting apologetic biblical proof, regardless of all the stuff with Hebrew Israelites and all that, because sometimes people are like, well, Moses didn't exist. And well, we have basically genetic evidence for Moses' brother and genetic evidence really ultimately for Abraham himself. Now they'll be like, oh, that's circumstantial, unless we can take a sample from Abraham. But the thing is, this is kind of how things like this work when you do this. This is the way it is. And this has been a fascinating thing. And the reason why there's an explosion, specifically in Jewish DNA, is because of their tendency not to intermarry. Now, what happens is Jews intermarry at a greater rate when persecution is less. But throughout much of their history, persecution is greater. And so this is an important thing, because you have sort of this isolated community that's traveling around the globe. There's not a whole lot of people groups that sort of have that shared type of history. It's a fascinating thing. Now, things are changing, and that's why this research, it's almost like the perfect timing. Things are changing because, especially in the West, Jews, they intermarry, you know what I'm saying? But we can look, and it's a fascinating thing to look. There's other isolated communities that they do this with. The Jews aren't the only one. There's certain communities, and you could talk about them. But this is a very, very fascinating thing because it also has this oral tradition that's not just oral. You know, it's written at this point, a written history that actually corroborates this genetic evidence. It's almost unbelievable, and that's why a lot of the scholars who are involved in this, a lot of them are secular. I don't know if there's any like sort of confessional people, and even the ones who have some kind of faith commitment seem decidedly secular. You know, they buy into evolution and everything else. So they're like constantly being surprised, like, well, I guess maybe this is right. You know, they're constantly being surprised when you listen to lectures and talks, or when you read what they write, sort of in their frank moments. You kind of see this constant surprise, but now it's almost just a matter of fact. It's just working out more and more of the details. So back going to this, at the 1999 Jewish Genome Conference in Israel, Professor Hammer, who was involved with the first study that I mentioned, and has been involved with a lot with this, he confirmed the numbers he gave were that 80% of all self-identified coenemes share a common set of genetic markers. And we mentioned that it's 6 different things together. So it's sort of a genetic signature. And that's important to understand. And it's just a fascinating thing. This means the line of the coeneme is a direct paternal line from Aaron, the very first high priest. That's what it means. And, he mentioned the Samaritans, Jikon did. This has also been tested with other populations. I got off track. Well, I wanted to mention them, but I forgot to mention one other group. I had mentioned the Limba and the Buba clan within the Limba, their priestly class, and how the numbers are very similar there to other populations. But it's also true with these smaller groups. Like there's a small population who has a tradition that they left Israel in 70 AD. They have a kind of a coeneme class that's a people group off the island of, I think it's called Derjaba, DJERBA. It's off the coast of Tunisia, so northern Africa. They sampled theirs as well. They also had the CMH, that's a colon modal haplotype, and also Jews from Jerusalem's old city as well. So this is fascinating stuff. Now, the other thing I mainly have is kind of leave some of that, and then what I have is sort of reactions by different researchers to this, different geneticists, because I think it's helpful sometimes to say, okay, what are they saying about this? And then I have a little bit on the Khazars, but I'll stop there. I'll probably read some of these reactions if that's okay, but then I'll stop before we get into Khazars, and I have a little bit more on Limba and a couple other things. But I know Jikon's going to do some follow up. But let me show some of these reactions, and some of these you can find in a very accessible book called DNA and Tradition: The Genetic Link to the Ancient Hebrews by Yaakov Kleiman. And I like it. It's very kind of user friendly, and it leads you to the if you want to get into them. But let me read some of these. Okay, so we'll start here with Dr. David Goldstein. He's a molecular geneticist at Oxford. Okay, and here's what he says. And I got all the links and sources if anybody wants. Quote, "It looks like this chromosomal type was a constituent of the ancestral Hebrew population. It was incredibly exciting to find something that could be tracing paternally inherited traits over 100 generations, 3,000 or 4,000 years of history," end quote. And then here is another guy. Let me get his credentials up here. Carl Skrorecki. He's the Rappaport Research Institute Director of Nephrology. That's basically a kidney specialist at Rambam Medical Center, Technikon, Israel Institute of Technology. Listen to what he says. Quote, "The oral tradition of the priesthood has a DNA or genetic counterpart. The scientific information confirms that the majority of contemporary Jewish males who identify themselves as coeneme are descended from a common male ancestor who founded a patrilineal dynasty consistent with the tradition of the Jewish priesthood. It's almost equivalent to finding a remnant of the garb of the first priest's family, as if you went to the Sinai and found some remnant of Aaron's anointment ceremony." And then he says this: "The simplest, most straightforward explanation is that these men have the Y chromosome of Aaron. The study suggests that a 3,000-year-old tradition is correct and has a biological counterpart." This is so amazing when you look at it. Here's Professor Michael Hammer. Here's what he says about it. Quote, "At first I was worried that it was a sampling artifact, a chance result of the group chosen because of the high frequency." So what he's saying is he thought it was a mistake because it seemed impossible that this could be right. He thought there was an error, right? "It was incredibly exciting to find something that could be tracing paternally inherited traits over 50 or more generations, 3,000 to 4,000 years of history. This is the first time ever we have been able to make a correlation with an ethnographic record over this time scale. Some people keep records that go back 3, maybe 4 generations, but 50 or more generations. It's a beautiful example of how father to son transmission of two things, one genetic, one cultural, gives you the same picture. That's amazing. And then I got like 3 more quotes that are all from Dr. Neil Bradman. He was one of the principal researchers on some of these studies. And listen to what he says. The Kohanim should all have the same Y chromosome if they come from an original source or a single individual. And so essentially that's kind of the hypothesis that was being tested by these guys. I must say, I was tending to expect it to come out the other way. So again, he was skeptical. And listen to what he says here about that. The difference between the Kohanim and the Israelites in both the Ashkenazic and the Sephardic population was statistically significant. While we did not detect a statistically significant difference between the Kohanim of the Ashkenazic and the Kohanim of the Sephardic, indicating that this oral tradition seems to have been around for the last 1,000 years. So let me explain what he's saying there. He's saying there's a significant difference between the Kohanim and the rest of the folks who would be described as modern Jews. But between the Kohanim class of Ashkenazi and Sephardic, there's not a statistical big difference. That's amazing. That's saying across basically 2 massively different communities, this one group is very similar. They're more similar to each other, even though they're in 2 different communities, than they are to the rest of the Jews around them. That it's almost, again, this. Again, this is almost unbelievable. Listen to this, what Bradman says here. Work that we're doing on additional Jews in different communities should enable us to get an insight into whether this time can be pushed backwards or not and how the priesthood may or may not have originated, he remarks. What I have to say is that we have not, despite what some newspaper headlines may have said, proved that the Bible was correct, and we have not shown that Aaron did exist. So you see, these guys, again, are skeptical. They're like, we're not proving the Bible right. They want to make sure they want to make sure they're saying that, because that's not their goal or mission. You see what I'm saying? But nonetheless, I mean, I think we can see this is clearly corroborative, and they said that. So it's like, okay, why didn't he need to say that? And then one last thing I'm going to read. We've been inundated with people who write to us asking for their Y chromosomes to be tested. Unfortunately, I cannot stamp anybody's Y chromosome to prove anything. This is simply a population study. And so one thing about that is, this is the last thing I mentioned, I kind of handed over, is Tudor Parfit, who had been involved with some of this. When people started hearing about it, there was a group that had a population off the coast of Papua New Guinea, or is in that area. They had heard about what Tudor Parfit was doing with like the Limba, for example. And so they call him, and then the leader of the community comes to his hotel room, right? And is like, hey, I want you to do us as well, because you're going to see we're Jews as well. And so the community's all excited because they think, ours is going to match up as well. This particular group, there in Papua New Guinea, the results were negative. The way Tudor Parfit put it was, he said, I think he used the phrase zilch, the word zilch. And it was kind of a tough thing because he had to announce this community. And he said he kind of chickened out. He said, well, the results were inconclusive. We can't say anything for sure. But basically then he said, well, yeah, there is a negative result. Now the community itself still believes the same thing. It has not affected them, in the sense of like, well, they're continuing to go on saying that, but the genetic evidence doesn't match. So it's not like everyone that gets tested, this happens. But it did happen again with Tudor Parfit, interestingly enough, and it's with a small Jewish community there in India, very small, and they're at the bottom of the caste system. And basically, everyone laughs at them because they say they're Jews and they've been mistreated for centuries, and they're basically, pariah, right? And they're like, test us too. Well, they also had the Cohen haplomodal type, and it matched up. And so the DNA in that instance exonerated them. And it's kind of an interesting thing. It almost kind of like, okay, their vibe was kind of like, we're suffering for a reason. It's true, we're not just saying it, but it doesn't always work out. Like the most controversial one is probably the Igbo, because that is a rather large group of people, and the DNA evidence has come back as negative. Now I know the Hebrew Israelites who believe in the Igbo thesis are going to be all upset and you're lying and this and that. But basically, look, I'm not a geneticist, so I'm finding out what they say, and I am in trying to go with the evidence as careful as I can. And
yeah, when majority of them are all saying one thing, because we had someone in the chat say, I don't trust most geneticists. Well, I said, well, when 99% of them are all saying the same thing, you kind of have to
well,
listen,
it's like this.
right?
That's fine if the person doesn't want to trust it, but tell us why. Why don't you trust them? Tell us what, and it's not about just trusting geneticists. It's about these results. And these are teams and groups of people who this is their specialty. They're not dabbling in DNA on the weekend, as if you could do such a thing. These are specialists in this area. Yeah. No one is, it's not just an argument from authority. It's saying, look, we have this and now it matches. Let me tell you something though, because it's funny they said that. I'm gonna tell you something. If they did testing, let's say the Hebrew Israelites in North America had some version of the Kohanim, like, oh, look, everyone with the last name of, let's use Laron's last name. Everyone with the last name of Campbell, we've discovered is highly likely to be Kohanim. And let's say that they did testing on Black Americans in North America with the last name of Campbell, right? And they're like, oh my goodness, look at this. It matches up. This is amazing. I guarantee you they would trust those genetic results. Like, oh, look at it. Because they try to do that with the limba. They'll be like, whenever we talk about genetic, like, well, you mentioned the limba. And then we talk about the limba and also how it's irrelevant to most Black Americans because they're in Zimbabwe and South Africa. That's not the West Coast people. It's not the West Coast, right? And so the point by saying that is this is not a significant factor in who came over in the transatlantic slave trade or who ended up in Western Hemisphere. And so it's like, okay. And also if you verify the limba, if you're going to use them, you're verifying the Ashkenazi, the Sephardic, and these other populations we've mentioned. It's like it's a catch-22 if they want to do that. But, if any of these guys have ever gotten a battle about, that's not my kid, I guarantee you that they'll trust those results. That's sure. Right. If they they know and it turns out that way.
That's a good point.
But, nonetheless, they'll say that, but that's fine. Tell us the reasons why. Tell us what's wrong there and explain it and things like that. And even with people who get exonerated for crimes they didn't commit because of DNA evidence, we celebrate that. That's a good thing, right? That's sort of 2 or 3 witnesses. One of the witnesses is sort of
that's a good point.
Right?
You can convict someone's entire life these days based on DNA evidence. So I mean,
or exonerate them.
Yeah.
And we celebrate that. And I guarantee if these guys have any sense of justice, they celebrate that as well.
Not too many people put into question that DNA evidence in the courts and stuff when it comes to that, right? And I just want to say quickly, thank you, Operation Cuteness, for the support for the super chat. She said, Vocab, can you talk about the E1B1 gene? Love, Nick, thank you. I don't know. We'll probably get there. I don't know if she's saying the gene right. But
well, okay, so that's a perfect segue to have me kind of chill and let G-Con speak. That exact question she just asked. So, G-Con, you just let me know if you need me, and because someone brought up E1B1A. So,
right. And so I'm actually E1B1A on my paternal side.
Hey, G-Con, I was wondering if you could maybe give people just like a quick introduction about your background and stuff, because this is the first time I ever met you. Maybe a lot of my subs ever met you too. So if you don't mind.
You got the email on his face. Can you put me down there?
Oh, sorry, bro. Yeah. Sorry.
You can't see his the bottom of his beautiful beard.
Yeah, I meant to do that actually when people are talking. I just got that up there, guys. If anyone wants to come on the show and has questions, that's my email on the screen. So send me an email and I'll send you a link. Sorry, go ahead.
So I used to be a Black Hebrew Israelite just as well. I want to say 2002, around that time, or 2001 actually, in that area. And so I was we didn't deal with the Old Testament. It was more so what Yahweh ben Yahweh. I mean, we didn't deal with the New Testament. It was more so Yahweh ben Yahweh. And so I got into that at a young age. And, I was in it for I want to say probably 2 or 3 years. Well, I'm going to say 4 years actually. And so during that time, I was taught a lot of things concerning, a lot of hate, basically, a lot of hate, against other nations, against Africans, because they sold us to the white man. That's what I was told. That's what, was learning at that time, and so I hated the Africans, and so we used to talk about Africans, and then we used to talk about also whites just as well. And so I came up out of that because I started studying a little bit when it comes to Isaiah 53 concerning the Messiah. And so when I went and asked him about, hey, this looked like this is talking about Jesus, who, you know, this in the New Testament. And so they couldn't answer that. And so I started going through a plethora of other scriptures in Isaiah. And so that's what made me kind of get out of that. Plus, I couldn't find myself to have a level of hatred that they wanted me to have. So I felt myself to where I was actually faking, which a lot of the Hebrew Israelites actually do, because they would never, if they seen a white baby or an African baby, you know what I'm saying, let that baby starve or sit outside. Some of them would, you know what I'm saying, but a lot of them that was faking like I was, they wouldn't do those things. They would help that child out. And so that's how I see myself. I didn't see myself as being having that type of hatred in me. So I felt like I was being fake. That's when I really, I'm sorry.
Sorry, man. I was going to say that's a good quality that you wouldn't let a baby starve.
Right. And so, yeah, exactly. And so that's when I really came out of a lot of that and became a Christian. I had a lady who used to talk to me a lot, and she introduced me to her brother. He would take me to church. And from then on, I just, you know, been speaking against a lot of those ways, a lot of those falsely taught things, and ran across Vocab and Faithful and a couple of other people, you know what I'm saying? But prior to that, years after down the line, because like I say, it's been, you know, I met them around what's it been, 4 years, Vocab, probably 3 years, around 3 to 4 years, I believe.
This is kind of off topic, but someone just made a super chat, so thank you. They just want to know, can a non-Israelite be a part of the 144K? Like, I'll answer and get it out of the way. I just because it's a super chat. Like, what do you think about that? Just a quick answer.
Me and Vocab kind of differ on that. My position is that a non-Israelite cannot be part of the 144K. That they are a evangelistical group at that time within the tribulation that brings a lot of souls to Christ.
Sorry to get you off topic. I just kind of like to try and honor those. So, but yeah, continue, man, with your story. And we were talking about E1B1, I think. Right?
Okay, you wanted to speak on that about the 100?
Yeah. If I could drop a link, I'm gonna drop a link in the live chat because G-Con and I went on Sister Cherry's platform.
Okay.
And we actually discussed this exact thing. I think it was a very profitable, good discussion.
Okay.
I gave my perspective, and then G-Con shared his view, and so you get to hear both views. We discussed that passage in detail. I think we were probably on there for an hour or more.
Nice.
I'll send that link. I'm going to find it right now while he's talking. I'm going to drop in the live chat.
Sounds good.
Yeah, that was a great conversation that we definitely had. And so but yeah, so that's kind of like how I got up out of that. And as far as the question about E1B1A, like I say, that most of that's EV38, or I think they call it, what do they call it? They call it EV38, right? That subclass that you see is where I'm actually from, but it originates out of Africa. And so the problem is when somebody say that E1B1A is a Israelite marker, it's a problem with that, because you should at least you should at least have something that originate outside of Africa. Why? Because you wasn't Israelites, according to the biblical text, wasn't born in Africa. Yeah, they went to Africa, but and they picked up markers, but they wasn't born in Africa. So the closest we get is like E3 markers, but then you have E1B1. Now E1B1 you find to where it's going to be someone in the Levant area. You're going to have E1B1 in North Africa just as well. But when you look at most African Americans, they don't have, like me, I don't have E1B1, but you should have E1B1 if you say that you are an Israelite, or you should have, you know, some J markers, J2 markers, K markers. Then they most people got G markers, I markers. These are markers that originate outside of Africa. So then they'll say on the maternal line, they'll say things like L3 markers, but they originate in Africa and then they spread across. But even with that, you still is not consistent with what we see in the biblical text tracing in geographical areas of markers that that Israelites are people who are Middle Eastern have picked up on their chromosomes from these geographical locations. When you go to these areas, you'll pick up mutations on your chromosomes that be passed down to your children, whether it's on the Y or the X chromosome. And once you accumulate those mutations, they can look at those pairs and look at the like you said, a biological clock. They call it a biological clock, to where the within the genome there was something that triggered that was different, that they might have picked up a mutation outside of the norm or either in the norm, whether it's through sexual selection, it might be through climate, diet, environment. And so you can look at some of these groups, and once you look at some of these mutations, they're outside of Africa. And so, like me, I have genes that come from also Europeans. I have like 14% European genes because my grandpa is white, my mom's dad is white, and so you can look at it some of those things. Like even when you talk about like Africans, most Africans that are in West Africa, if you notice, they don't have beards. They can't grow beards, a lot of them, and that's weird. But they can't really grow it a lot. And so when you look at a lot of African Americans that do grow beards, then a lot of them have an admixture of what we see of European genes.
You know, that's a good point you bring up, because I live in Canada, and a lot of the native you guys call Native Americans, they can't grow beards or facial hair very well at all either. So they
can't grow it at all. And so when you look at that, it's a thing to where even when you look at those who had E1B1A among the Egyptians, if you look at it, a lot of them would take beards and actually paste them on their face or in their relics, or put them on their face, attach beards to their face, because they couldn't really grow beards like that. And so that's what we have to look at too, just as well as consuming milk is another one. Most people who are in the Levant area are shepherds. Also, most people who are in North Africa are shepherds too. And so you kind of see that there's admixture there. But for the most part, a lot of these guys who are saying that they're Israelites, you guys need to really take a DNA test, because if you can't go and get a snip and look at somebody who's from Arabia, because you should have markers out of those areas autosomally. If you can't get somebody who's been through these areas that Israelites have biblically been, if you look at the text and also look at extra biblical sources, then you can't say that you're an Israelite, because once we take the DNA test, we see that you're like 88% there's pure African. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with it. But at the same time, if you're going to say you're an Israelite, at least have some of these markers that came out of the areas of what biblical Israelites where they were geographically at. And they don't have anything.
That's another thing I want to ask you is like, how do you feel about like a lot of the Hebrew Israelites that are calling like Africans disgusting, and like I think they should embrace their like African heritage, like where they come from, you know? How do you feel about that being an African American? That's what I want to ask you.
I feel really bad about that, because at one point I used to do the same thing, and it's really a thing of self-hate. And also you have to understand that when people have been taken into servitude or taken into slavery, they want to identify with something. And so because they want to identify with something, and I wanted to identify with something, that's the first thing to where I will identify with. Why? Because when you look at the biblical text, it explains servitude, not just from a black perspective, but from a perspective of human beings, of why human beings became servants in the first place. And so once you look at that, you identify.
So real quick, this is something that I want to get clear to people. And when my Yap family gets a hold of this, they're going to rip this to shreds. Like, I've been quiet on this because there's been a lot to talk about, but I'm going to let my Yap family get to it. But so this is where I can't fault Nick on not having the proper understanding of there being Israelites in West Africa historically, right? No matter what number you want to argue on, you can't deny that historically that is the case. So not only is Vocab on there, but there's G-Con on there. And shout out to G-Con. Like, I got no beef with G-Con, but this is where he's 1,000,000% incorrect. That, like, unfortunately, my man G-Con is speaking above his pay grade right here, right? So he's talking about, like, you should expect to see Israelites with an Israelite or with the haplogroup that comes from outside of Africa or the Levant or something like that, right? And just a little while ago, he was asked about E1B1A and starts talking about E1B, right? i.e. EP2. And says that you can find EP2 in the Levant and also in North Africa. Again, he was just talking about E1B1A, i.e. like EV38, etc., and all them kind of things. And he's not giving you he's not giving you what the science says about the origins of E1B1A or any of those things there. He's giving you conjecture, right? But here's what he's definitely not giving you. He's not giving you the fact that EP2 or E1B, as he was talking about, which was like he says is found in Levant and in North Africa. He's not telling you that the next mutation from that is it either splits into E1B1A or E1B1B. So wherever you find EP2, you find the potential for the E1B1A mutation. So because someone's E1B1A, that doesn't negate the fact that they could be connected to EP2. Does not negate that concept. But that nuance isn't being broken down. Like, so my man Vocab was going through papers talking about the Kohimodal haplotype, right? And getting into the minutia and nuance of all that. But was not given the flip arguments and given the same nuance to the other arguments and whatnot, like what needs to be done here. So I can't fault my man Nick for not understanding the information, because like right now Nick's just answering an honest question, like, so why don't they just connect to their African heritage or whatnot? And here's the false dichotomy. The false dichotomy is that connecting to that you can't be Israelite and African, or that an Israelite tradition is un-African, because they're negating the fact that there was an Israelite tradition in West Africa. So the assumption is that you're not an Israelite, you're West African. So just practice something that's West African and has nothing to do with the Israelite tradition. And that's getting they're doubling down on that concept with the misinformation of EP2 has no connection to E1B1A. Doubling down on it. So like, yeah, at one point, like my Yap family's gonna look at this whole thing and tear this whole thing apart. But this is very important to understand. And again, this plays into the misunderstanding that Nick and Joe have about there being no Israelites of West African descent or in West Africa, etc. Hence, they reject the claim out of hand when my man Gideon talks about the concept coming from West Africa. Anyway, I'm gonna let it keep playing.
Identify with that, and once you identify with it, you can identify with the servitude, which is fine. But this is not just a Israelite thing. This is not just a black thing. Servitude came into place after the fall of Adam. When you look at Adam, when he fell, he became into servitude. Whether if he's tilling the ground, it's going to bring forth harsh times. So he's going to see if there's a servant that can help his task a little bit easier. That's what most human beings was looking at, to make it easier on them because of these harsh times in the curse of the earth. And so when you look at that, I felt really bad to look and see and say that I can look at my ancestors and really say I hate them, and then say, well, I don't come from them because of certain things of how they live. Well, I'm gonna say this and then I'm gonna let Vocab go in. But when you look at African cultures, when you look at cultures that are not just African cultures, but cultures who are more so, I'm gonna say, more so nature bound, naturally bound. A lot of these people, they live off the land, and a lot of things that we care about as Americans, as being civilized, we do so more so of destroying the earth just as well. You know what I'm saying? And even though they live more so in a primitive way, it's more so closely to a natural based type of lifestyle. And there's nothing wrong with that. Whereas we get upset with that, and we look and we say, well, these people are so primitive or whatever case may be, which is not a bad thing. But then also when we look at people who are civilized, that's a great thing if they civilized, to each his own. But for the most part, I'm not going to judge somebody because I realize it. I say, well, these people may be on a sense they're not dealing with modern science, or they're not dealing with certain things. They may be dealing with some type of tradition or whatever the case may be. But for the most part, I'm not ashamed of who I come from or where I come from, because when I look at what traditionally what Africans have brought forth, you have your Africans that have also been high advanced in civilization for us East Africans and North Africans. And then when you start talking about people who went farther west, they didn't deal with a lot of gold. Really didn't mean too much to them to where they'll trade you for gold. They use it for their idols, but, whereas we do certain things with gold, whatever the case may be, or silvers. And so I'm not ashamed of none of those things. I believe it to each his own, but for the most part, in Christ is where I basically identify at. And that's what was best for me. To when I read the Bible, I found that my identity to be in Christ. Now I'm gonna say this, and people might get upset with what I'm about to say, but Christ is asking you to do something normally that a person who's been traditionally in rooted in their ancestors types of beliefs that they wouldn't want to do, and that he's asking you to follow him. And so when he asks you to follow him, a lot of those traditions that wasn't right traditions that Christ is asking you to lay those things down, like Paul did. A lot of these traditions and certain things that he counted it as dumb to come to Christ. And so that's one of the things that, whether you black, whether you white, whoever, culturally, whoever you are, when you're a Christian, you ought to take on what Christ is doing, what he's doing, what the biblical text tell us through his epistles, what the Spirit of God is telling you to bear witness of the word of God through the gospel. And that's what we should take on. And so I don't have no problem with looking at a person and saying, I'm not really ashamed of that. But at the same time, I do need to transition and really walk with Christ and really take on that lifestyle. Because ultimately, when you get to the end times, the Bible, it says that everyone is going to take on the ways and be conformed to the image of the Son. So that's something we might want to think about. Yeah, you might be holding on those things right now, but when you come to Christ, you need to count a lot of those things as dumb, and really follow Christ. Not saying that a lot of those things are wrong, because some of those things that we see, the natural man have things that are concerning God, it is in him by nature. But a lot of those other things is just not really good. So that's what I got to say about that.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah, thank you very much, man. That was awesome.
I could comment from a comment. Great job, guys. But this is what we get. Hamite Queen said, I thought there were going to be DNA specialists here. Okay, let's pretend the ones that they were quoting were here. Would that change anything? Did you get anything out of this?
So this is where I got a huge problem with some of the, so this is where me and G-Con got to square something away. Yeah. And so G-Con, I'm going to search you out, bro, because we got to have this conversation in public, fam. We got to talk this one out. So I want to go back to something that was said. So my G Nick said, why don't they just identify, like, why don't they identify with their African heritage or whatnot? Okay. So how many of them would be Christian coming from West Africa? How many would be Muslim coming from West Africa? How many would be Jewish coming from West Africa? How many would be practicing African spirituality coming from West Africa? How many would be practicing Reformed Christianity coming from West Africa? Absolutely zero. Absolutely zero. But you know what we can show? Hold on right quick. Let me do it to you like this. We can show via documentation that there were Christians in West Africa, but they had nothing to do with the Greco-Roman or Roman Catholic or Reformed Christian tradition. Nothing to do with it. And that they were living in Muslim lands and eventually converted to Islam. We can show this firmly in the Arabic sources in West Africa, recorded by the Muslims. I've shown this stuff on my channel multiple times. Yeah. We can clearly see that in West Africa, in a kingdom called Takrur, that there was a Christian part of West Africa. And y'all can pause this up and read this stuff as you want. I'm not going to read this stuff. I'm just going to let it be in the background as I'm talking. But there's a Christian kingdom of Takrur that is rich in gold, so rich that they supply a Muslim king with so much gold that when he goes on Hajj and goes to Egypt on his way to Mecca, he drops so much gold that it affects the gold price for a decade. And that king says, yeah, like we can't make the gold mines produce. Like someone asked him, why don't you just go take the gold mines from the people in Takrur? He's like, nah, like A, they're Christians there, but B, like we tried taking it before. And when we take the mines don't produce like when they have control of it. So we let them take control of it and we take the taxation basically. And they're so powerful that they're even being said to be oppressive in the area. That they're actually being able to push back on the Muslim dominance of the area. And this is before Western colonial contact. And this is an area, Takrur is in between Senegal and Mauritania. Now, here's the inconvenient truth about these sources. These same sources talk about a Jewish kingdom to the south of Takrur called Lamlam. These same Arabic sources break down all kind of migrations from places like Yemen, etc., to where you see Jewish and Christian populations and whatnot. So when you go look at these areas where our people were taken from, what were they practicing? They were practicing Islam. They were practicing Judaism. They were practicing a non-Western form of Christianity. And they were practicing African spiritual traditions. And we know for a fact, as I showed you earlier, let me do it again. Let me do it again. When people came off the slave ships, we see these practices. We see these practices here in the Americas. In low country Christianity traditions. Looking very much so out of the Bible or out of an Eastern tradition. So when there's this talk about people rejecting their African tradition, see, this is where people like G-Con and Vocab need to step in and be like, well, you know what? Historically speaking, there were Jews in this area. There were Christians in this area. All them kind of things. And that connecting to this thing. Like, so check this out. Is Ethiopian Christianity not an African tradition? Is Coptic Christianity not an African tradition? Is the Ethiopian Jewish tradition not an African tradition? Is the Moroccan Jewish tradition not an African tradition? Is the Egyptian tradition not an African tradition? Y'all break it down for me. Y'all break it down for me. I need to understand. So were the Jews in Lam? Was that not an African Jewish tradition? Or were they Orthodox European Jews living in West Africa? Or somehow some Mizrahi Jews who were no longer Mizrahi Jews in West Africa? This I need to understand, fam. Were the Christians in Takrur, were they practicing Reformed Christianity? Were they monophysite? Were they diphysite? But here's what we know. We know that coming off them slave ships, fam, we see these practices here. We see a full tradition. A full tradition. So if I practice this, am I anti-African? Am I denying my African heritage? If I choose to walk away from Calvinism, from the Catholic Church and from Protestant Christianity and do this, am I rejecting Christianity? Or would you be cool with it because this is an African form that came off the slave ship that my people were documented as practicing? That my people were documented as practicing. This comes out of their mouth, from their oral tradition. This is what they told me through their story and their tongue, what they practice. Now, right now, if I want to go back to doing anything that looks like this, I'm being told that I'm a Judaizer in this whole piece. But you know what? This looks strikingly similar to Christianity in Ethiopia. Strikingly similar to the types of Christianity that were coming over to West Africa at certain portions of time, and certain migrations and whatnot. And what's ironic is we're getting back migrations to the same places. There's people in Ethiopia right now called Takarir because they're being called the people of Takrur from West Africa, migrating back to Ethiopia. And what the Ethiopians call them is their ancient West African name of Takrur. So they call them Takrir. And you know what? When the Takrir go to Ethiopia, they find a Christianity that don't look too different from this here. Like what people say, the most Jewish looking of Christianities. The most Jewish looking of Christianity. So again, I say, is that not an African tradition? So when it comes to this right here, Nick, I'm not even mad at you. You should have got better information right here. You don't know this here. And people like G-Con and Vocab, right? They know. So G-Con knows people like me and the people I run with. Vocab is very well aware of me and the people I run with. This information is out there. This information is on my channel. I'm putting this stuff out there. This is what I'm saying. I got no issue repping Christianity. in the sense that we're like, you know what, that's actually like when people like when the conscious community says that's not an African tradition. No, it's an African tradition, fam. And y'all just denied that it was. That's why my man G-Con had come through. Well, my identity's in Christ and blah blah. That's not good enough, fam. Don't tell me that when vocab gets to be Italian, when you call yourself Big Hamite. Don't tell me that when BK apologist gets to be Puerto Rican, when Faithful gets to be Puerto Rican. Don't tell me that when my G gets to be Canadian. Don't tell me that when everyone gets to be have a nationality, but the people of the scrolls, etc. Whatnot. Don't tell me that the West African Israelite tradition is the only one that people can't claim a connection to. If you come from North Africa, you can. If you come from Europe, you can. You can find the Jews you connect to. If you come from the Middle East, you can. Hell, if you come from India, you can. But if you come from West Africa, you can. East Africa, you can. South Africa, but not East Africa, but not West Africa. Someone got to explain it to me why. If Jews made it to West Africa, how come they don't get to have progeny? And how come their progeny doesn't get to connect to the tradition? Like right now, we're living. Y'all are giving me some Twilight Zone episodes where like the Igbo Jews are being identified as Jews by a proper Beit Din, by a Sephardic Beit Din at that. Knowing doggone well, like the very people in this low country, fam. Igbos are getting shipped there. It's part of the genetic infrastructure of the people here. You tell me they don't connect to it? I don't understand. It doesn't make sense. But better information needs to come out from the mouths of the Christian apologists and urban apologists themselves, fam. Because your false dichotomies, fam. If the camps start remixing what me and my people are saying about genetics and history and start using it on y'all got nothing at that juncture. Like we're being nice with it. Me and mines are being nice with it. We're not even coming for y'all with the information. We're just trying to give it to our people. Go on, let these camps remix this stuff. There's people trying to remix my stuff already, remix my people's stuff already, fam. And we see them doing it. When they get proficient at that joint, fam, like if I wanted to be a gaslighter and fallacious and just come at y'all and just like really like be rah-rah about it, like it's not hard to get a big channel. I gotta be anti-Ashkenazi Jew. And from then on, fam, I gotta be anti the church. I gotta say that we're the real people of the book. And let me start remixing my own information in a fallacious way to start gaslighting y'all with actual history and actual genetics. Y'all wouldn't stand a chance, fam. Y'all wouldn't stand. If me and mines had the camp mentality with our information, bro, it'd be a wrap. A, we'd be swimming in dough. And B, we'd be swimming in followers. The camps are already passing y'all up, and they don't even have our information, fam. They're just going off the fact that y'all are coming at them like hypocrites. And that's what this stuff sounds like. So when my G says, why don't they just be satisfied with being African? How do you feel about them denying their African heritage? And then G-Con comes back with saying, yeah, I find my identity in Christ. Wait a minute. So is that or is that not your African heritage? I'm trying to understand. Is that you accepting your African heritage or denying your African heritage? Because I'm out here defending the fact that you can be African and Christian as part of your thing. Are y'all? Because you didn't even tell him that. You didn't tell that to Nick. And that's why I can't be mad at Nick on this one, because he's not getting the full picture. He's getting a false dichotomy. Starting at a fallacy. Where's he going to end? A fallacy. Starting at a fallacy. Where is he going to end? A fallacy. So I'm going to play this out a little bit longer. Then I'm going to stop it. But yeah, when my peoples get into it, fam, I promise you, Yaps finna tear this apart a little bit. because again, it's an obvious false dichotomy when it comes to the genetics. So much so that there's Christian people on Vocab's side that are starting to favor things outside of what Vocab's saying here about the cohemotype haplotype, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In the E versus J conversation. So it's going to be interesting when they come on, fam. It's going to be interesting when they cover this information. Super interesting. I'm going back on me. I'm going to let it play. But G-Con, yeah, I got to track you down, fam, because we do got to clear this one up. Because that kind of statement right there is something that's we as people of African descent got to do better when we're going out in public and being the face for such. Because my man's asking you, well, how do you feel about that? So he's looking to you to tell him what's cool and what's not cool about the thing, right? What's acceptable and what's not acceptable, right? And what needs to be understood is like, you know what? The people coming off the slave ships were Christians, Muslims, Jews, and doing African spirituality. All of those are African traditions. So I can't knock people for wanting to being Israelites. Like that's not an African tradition. Now I can knock the One West people for having like the dirty Hamite concept. I can definitely say that. And G-Con knows we agree with that concept because G-Con knows that we've debated the One West cats with him on his channel. And I've moderated debates with him for him on Debates All For You. And when he was part of the War Machine, we was getting it in all day with the on them concepts, right? So G-Con knows for a fact that there's people who don't rock with the dirty Hamite concept. And that needs to get clarified for the people, fam. So G-Con and Vocab could have done better in this situation. Because people like Nick just coming into this thing doesn't know any better, fam. And again, where he's coming from, bro, there's like seven people calling themselves Israelites. And we talked to all 7 of them on G-Con's channel. You feel what I'm saying? And G-Con knows that. And G-Con very well knows that. And G-Con knows Ibri. He knows Yeshu, Genesis 49ers or whatnot. He knows the Yap Gang. He knows the whole model. Faithful knows him. Abu knows about him. Vocab knows about him. This could have very, very easily been a well-rounded conversation where a lot of information was brought out. But again, it's a false dichotomy, and that's the recipe for failure going further. And not just for urban apologists, for everybody in the game, because again, it keeps this tit for tat of like, oh man, see, they're painting the false dichotomy, and they don't want to point to the truth even when it's coming out, just because it's coming out our mouths, which points to we get to complain, or people get to complain about being treated like a victim because they are being victimized. They are being oppressed in a situation. You can't take the truth from them just because it's them. Nah, fam. But anyway, going for it. I'm gonna let it play.
So we have to be a specialist to come talk. We can't read a book.
Sounds like G-Con actually.
This is what I want
quite a bit.
I know, but this is that kind of silliness, guys. I'm trying to really further the conversation here. You know for sure no one you're listening to on that side is a specialist. So how would you expect that here, number one? And number two, be gracious. These guys are giving us knowledge. So I'll say that.
Yeah, it's funny because I thought they'd be specialists, but the other guy, I don't trust any of the specialists.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's like the
we're not specialists, but what we want to do is to show you what the specialist is saying. That's why there's an article that I actually wanted to bring out that talks about Ashkenazi Jews, which is an article to where if you look at it, it says it comes from surprised Ashkenazi Jews are genetically European. And this is one of the ones that most Black Hebrew Israelites are going to go to. This one is by Tia Goose, assistant manager editor, right? But there's an abstract to this coming up out of Live Science that goes back to another article, but I'm going to read this one here. They both say the same thing. But I want to key in on I'm gonna screen share here, and I'm gonna let you guys see this. And let me know if you can see. Can you guys see that?
As soon as I add it, yep, now we can.
All right, so this is the article right here, and it comes out of Live Science. But it says, surprise, Ashkenazi Jews are genetically European. And this is one of the articles that they'll pull up, and they'll read from this and just get it all wrong. And that's the problem. When they start talking about DNA, and we go read what they pull up, it's not saying what they're saying, and this is not saying what they're saying. Now, most people are going to give you what you call the Ashkenazis or Khazarians. That's what they're going to tell you, right? But I want to read this real quick. It says the origin of Ashkenazi Jews who come mostly recently from Europe has largely been shrouded in mystery. But a new study suggests that at least their maternal, notice it says maternal lineage. This is not paternal. This is maternal. This comes from their mother's side, may derive largely from Europe. Now, if anybody know anything about Jews, right? Within the diaspora, both of them, Jews left their homeland, and a lot of them, according to the law, will be split up from their families, and their women will be given off to their slave masters. So clearly, according to the law, we do know that would happen. So if a Jew is found in himself to be native of a land of, I want to say India and certain, like the Koshin Jews, they're going to take on the women that are in those vicinities. And that's going to be what's on their maternal line. So when you start looking at it, they're going to look like people of India. Why? Because on their maternal line, you see that when a child comes from about, and they take on a wife from India, then you see clearly that them parents come down, he's going to look like his father or his mother. Either way, what they found out is most Jews look like the people who took them into captivity. Why? Because on their maternal side, they're closely related to the people that are native of those lands where they was taken to. So let's look what it says here. Well, the finding may seem intuitive. It contradicts the notion that the European Jews mostly descend from people who left Israel in the Middle East around 2,000 years ago. Instead, a substantial portion of the population originated from local Europeans who converted to Judaism. Now remember, this is the maternal lineage. This is the maternal lineage. It says study to co-author Martin Richards, an archaeogeneticist at the University of Huddersfield in England. It says little is known about the history of Ashkenazi Jews before they were expelled from the Mediterranean and settled in what is now Poland around the 12th century. On average, all Ashkenazi Jews are genetically as closely related to each other as fourth and fifth cousins, said Dr. Harry Oysterer, a pathology, pediatrics, and genetics professor of Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York and author of Legacy and Genetic History of Jewish Population, Oxford University Press 2012, right? But what I want y'all to key in is, I'm going to jump down some more. Let's go to, somebody got an echo in the back. I think they moved around. You heard it.
Oh, sorry. I muted myself by accident.
It says, but depending on whether the lineage gets traced through maternal or paternal DNA or through the rest of the genome, researchers get very different answers for whether Ashkenazis originally came from Europe or the Near East. Watch this. Past research found that 50% to 80% of DNA from the Y chromosome, from the Ashkenazi Y chromosome, which is used to trace the male lineage, watch this, originated in the Near East, Richard said. So when we talk about those J1 markers, J2 markers, we talk about different E1, B1 markers you see that come from Moroccan Jews, also other Jews, Mizraim Jews, Mountain Jews, Elam Jews. These are markers that you see that have J1, J2 markers that we see that are traced back from what we see Near East and also from Middle East, what we call the Levant area today. It says, which is used to trace the male lineage originating in the Near East, Richard said, that supported a story wherein Jews came from Israel, largely excused intermarriage when they settled in Europe, the Holy Land. So when you look at the European Jews, they look like Europeans, right? And some of them look like also those who are from the Levant areas are either people who are from the Middle East or Near East, right? And so when you look at what you call other Jews, Mizraim Jews, they look like people that are of Egypt. When you look at Moroccan Jews, they look like people that are of North Africa. All of them look like the people who they went to. Why? Because as we see with an example that happened with the Ashkenazi Jews, they took on women in those areas. And we know you're going to look like your mother, father, if not both of them. So it can be that an Ashkenazi Jew who is a European Jew can look exactly like the Europeans. Why? Because as you see on their maternal line, they took on women from those areas. And when those alleles are passed down, it's going to have mutations on both sides. Why? And also that X marker that is passed down. So look what it says here. But historical documents tell a slightly different tale. Based on accounts such as those of Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, by the time of the destruction of the Second Temple in AD 70, as many as 6 million Jews were living in the Roman Empire. That's where they was living at. But outside Israel, mainly in Italy and Southern Europe. In contrast, only about 500,000 lived in Judea, said Oysterer, who was not involved in the new study. The major Jewish communities were outside Judea, Oysterer told the live stream. Now, most people might look at it and say, well, here's the maternal DNA. It tells you right here. Richards and his colleagues analyzed mitochondrial DNA, the woman's side, which is contained in the cytoplasm of the egg and passed down only from the mother from more than 3,500 people throughout the Near East, the Caucasus, and Europe, including Ashkenazi Jews. The team found that 4 founders were responsible for 40% of Ashkenazi, watch this, mitochondrial DNA, and that all of these founders originated in Europe. The majority of the remaining people could be traced to other European lineages. And all told, more than 80% of the maternal lineages of Ashkenazi Jews could be traced to Europe, with only a few lineages originated in the Near East. So that's on the maternal side when you read this article. We just read on the paternal side that they have DNA that comes back from the Near East, that originates from the Near East. You can't get past it. You can't escape that. So this is an article that you want to check out. You can I'm gonna put this in the chat room, and you guys can check that out and go from there with that, and the rest of this article out. And that's really what I got to say on that part. And the vocab, if you want to add to that, you can say something, or anybody else or whatever.
Well, you kind of brought up the Khazars. I guess maybe we should. I mean, I don't know if people kind of understand what that hypothesis is all about. I mean, so a lot of times you'll have people who want to displace any given modern Jewish population, and they'll say, well, they're really Khazars. And, there was a kingdom that there's some historical evidence that they kind of had a mass conversion into Judaism. And I think this would be kind of roughly in the area around maybe what's called modern day Georgia. In fact, when they do genetic studies on this, since we don't really know exactly what a Khazar is, I think they use sort of the Georgians as an analog genetically. And G-Con could correct me about some of this stuff. And then what happens is people will say, well, modern day Jews are actually Khazars. Now, there's a few things with that, because what they're trying to say is these folks aren't really Jews. They're actually Khazarians. So they're actually converts. So they're imposters. Well, that would only affects even if like the kind of theory was true. The question is, how does that explain all of modern day Jewry? Because you maybe could explain it from certain populations or something like that, and from a certain point going forward. But how would you explain all of modern day Jewry? So how would that explain these long-standing communities in Iraq and Iran, for example, the Baghdadi Jews, as they're called, out of Iraq, and the Persian Jews or Iranian Jews? How would explain them, who are these long-standing communities who have been there since captivity? So how would that do that? It wouldn't. It would only explain certain parts. There's also a question of numbers. So how many Khazars converted, right? And so the point is that with the Khazarian theory, there's some truth to it, meaning there were Khazars who converted, but we don't really know the numbers. And then it doesn't explain everything, and it doesn't explain anything before. So sometimes they'll read Revelation and be like, look, they're imposters, they're Khazars. Well, hold on. The Revelation 2:9, written in the 1st century, how would this later conversion, kind of in the beginning of the medieval era, whenever it was, how was that going to explain Revelation 2:9-3:9 when it's writing in the 1st century? It wouldn't, because it wouldn't be Khazars yet, even if it was true. But it appears you're talking a small percentage of modern day Jewish populations, like perhaps out of the Ashkenazi, maybe there's 3% from the analysis I heard that could have what looks to be some kind of version of Khazarian DNA. And again, some of this is speculative, because it's like, what do we know of who they were? But it's usually go ahead.
Let me say this real quick. I'm a screen share, and I want to add to that really, really quick.
Yeah, go back and forth, man. Just go back and forth. Whatever you got, just boom, 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 boom. I'm not really presenting like I was kind of in the beginning, G-Con, so I'm just whatever. Yeah.
We also got a caller, guys. So
okay, there G-Con says what he wants to say.
Okay, so can you guys see my screen real quick? All right, so if you look at it, it says choice of surrogate populations. Now, this comes from Aaron. Right, I'm gonna go up and let y'all look at this article. Right, this is an NCBI article. This comes from Aaron Elhock. Now it says the missing link of Jewish European ancestry, contrasting the Rhineland and Khazarian hypothesis. Now this is the one who is one of the guys who basically did the study, and he's a geneticist, but he made some errors, and a lot of the mainstream people who you see. You see who are geneticists try to check him on his errors, but he didn't basically correct himself. And somebody got some noise going in the background still. But if you look at here, I want to go right here where it says choice of surrogate populations. Now, I want to read this real quick, because this is one of the errors that Aaron Elhock actually made when it comes to the Khazarians. It says, as the ancient, like Vocab said, there in 700 AD is around this time when they start talking about the Khazarians. But prior to that, if you look at the areas, Israelites would have been dispersed to those areas. Why? Because most of the empires absorbed each other once they came into play. And that was one of the areas that Israelites would have been scattered to, as well as other populations who were scattered during the times of Babylon and the Syrian kings, or whatever the case may be, and after that. So look what it says, sir. As the ancient Judeans and Khazars have been vanquished. Now, this is from his own abstract, his own writings. As the ancient Judeans and Khazars have been vanquished, and their remains have yet to be sequenced in accordance with previous studies. You can see he gives the sources here. So you can't say that a person is a Khazarian based upon DNA. Why? Because you don't have any Khazarian DNA. It's been vanquished. Now, on the case of ancient Judeans, it's possible that we have ancient Canaanite DNA, which lines up with Ashkenazi and other Jews markers that they have. That is another article that they, a recent paper that they came out with, to where they kind of sequence the same, which goes way back around about 35 to 4,500 years ago with Canaanites in Lebanon and those areas. And so when you look at this paper, you can't say that a person is a Khazarian because you went to those populations that are there today. And those populations that are there today is a bottleneck. Why? Because that area is the most, I want to say the second diverse area because of it's been overran through many of empires and many of wars. So that area, you can't say, I'm going to go and test these people that are there today. They don't claim to be Khazarians. In your paperwork, you said you have no Khazarian DNA. It's been vanquished. So you can't say that these people are Khazarians based upon that alone, genetically. And the Khazarian theory is something that has been mainstream scientists, and they do not hold that. They don't go by that. Why? Because it holds no weight, and the majority of people are against Aaron Elhak and his work that are scholars that's been in this field and that has come together and said that his work is not credible. He took his methodology is based upon his opinion rather than what the actual paperwork and also studies are saying as geneticists. So I disagree with the Khazarian theory hypothesis based upon his own work here as you see of how he chose his methodology of going about to sequence populations that are modelly there today, but you don't have no Khazarian DNA at all to even sequence that because it's been vanquished.
Yeah, I think a good book to get is Kevin Allen Brooks' second edition of the Jews of Khazaria. It's an academic book, so I'm not talking about the first edition because the first edition was like 1975, and I don't think he was able to really have DNA evidence in there. But this is edition I'm talking about is 2006, and he concludes that you don't have a situation where you got essentially the progenitors of Ashkenazi Jews being Khazarian, and genetics is part of the reasoning for his conclusion there. And people will refer to the 13th tribe by Arthur Kessler, and I think it's the one Shlomo Hines or Sand inventing the Jewish people, and they'll kind of just put it out there as if that does it, but they usually don't understand a lot of the issues related to it. And so on a historical and now genetic level, really those have been discounted as far as the way they've been presented. It's one thing to say, okay, here's this little kind of drop in a bucket. It's another to say all Jews are this, because this would only, first of all, explain Ashkenazi Jews, not all Jews, but they try to use it as, well, all these Jews are just, and so, but it also, there's not enough information and evidence that you have this total replacement. It's like a ridiculous thing. Like they converted, they came in, and then, the Jews taught them how to be Jewish. And then all of a sudden the Khazarians, what did they do? Did they kill them all? Like, where did they go? Because they're converting into something. And another funny thing about this hypothesis, when the one Westers present it, they're like presenting this, the Khazarians, that's what the Jews are. You'll hear them call them that. Oh, so you're telling me that your supposed ancestors believed in conversion then? Because they have this whole massive Gentile kingdom coming on in, teaching them how to do the do. You see what I'm saying? They use their information in isolation. Like, do you realize when you say that you're telling me that your ancestors believed in conversion, which the small reality to Khazarian conversion, however large it was, does actually show that. And so it's actually, the theory ends up being evidence against some of the Hebrew Israelites' very position, those who are sort of the anti-conversion type, right? And so it's a very interesting thing. There's a lot more to get into it, but on a historical and scientific level, it's not a credible thing as far as a replacement theory. To say something happened and there's the small percentage left, I think that's true enough. And I think most of the data, it looks like you might have around 3% where you have it still basically present within Ashkenazi population. So a very small thing. But so, it's a very interesting thing. So, what are kind of the quote original Jews? Well, you don't have this one-to-one correlation because these aren't what are called founders populations where there's basically been zero intermarriage. It's minimal. But it looks like, they're people from the Levant who themselves were a mixed bag. And as they go out throughout the world over 2 millennia, they have intermarriage and converts. So it's not going to be a one-to-one correlation anyway. And that's why you find Jews spread out all over who end up looking different than they would have looked in the first century. The closest kind of rough analog we have to what Jews from the first century would look like, and this is based upon things like artwork and even skulls and skeletons that have been found in Galilee would be the Baghdadi Jews. And if somebody wants to see that, look up Jews of Iraq or Iraqi Jews. Now, there's only 4 left, is my understanding, left in Iraq because of persecution and all kinds of horrible things. So now they're spread throughout the world, and they're sometimes called Baghdadi Jews, but they don't actually live in Baghdad anymore. But you look at that population, and the consensus is that's the closest to what perhaps first century Jews, as far as if a person's concerned really with looks, would have looked like, because it's highly unlikely that most, like for example, Ashkenazis would represent sort of the look of a first century Jew. I think that's pretty well established. If we're just doing, because the look thing is very superficial ultimately, because it's only a small expression of the underlying DNA. It's a very, very small kind of superficial thing, and it's silly to base it upon, especially when a lot of the Hebrew Israelites believe that they're intermixing with these African populations, but a lot of them don't think they're African. Well, so it shows the look's not really even important anyway, because you're saying someone can like look so similar that you kind of forgot you were them and they're intermixed. You know what I'm saying? But you're not them because of a vibration that they give or something like that. And these guys will actually say, well, Africans move different than us, and really odd stuff like that. But it's quite a bizarre thing. So the thing is, we're not obsessed with this. But the thing is, because they go here, we have to end up talking about it. And it does lead to some interesting avenues. But that's kind of the final thing I'll say. You said you had a caller or something, unless G-Con want to say something. Was that what you said?
Well, I did have a caller, but he seems to be having connection problems or something because he's sitting in here not connected. So.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, all right.
Yeah, just to chime in with what you brothers are saying. It's so good. We have Rahab coming from the Canaanites into the Israelite lineage. We have Moses marrying a Cushite and Joseph marrying an Egyptian. And all of these represent major people groups converting into Israel just in that time. So what you guys are saying, when they're coming into European lands, the women would be fair game, right? If they converted, and that would be part of their culture. So I don't get why that's such a hang up, but I know that has to fit into their way of thinking. But maybe, brothers, you can answer this for me. How do they deal with it just in the things we already know? Let's say like with Moses and Zipporah, you take the DNA of that child, that's not going to be pure Israelite. That's going to represent part of that Cushite land and part of the Israelite, like exactly like as if they go to Europe, right, and disperse among those people. I mean, how do they answer this when we see it in the Bible already happening?
You trying to say something, G-Con? Are you muted?
Yeah, because when you look at Jeremiah 29, right? Jeremiah 29, it says here, let's go to verse 6. It says, let's look at verse 4. It says, Jeremiah 29, verse 4. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, unto all that are carried away captives, whom I have caused to be carried away from Jerusalem unto Babylon. Build ye houses, and dwell in them, and plant gardens, and eat the fruit of them. Take ye wives, and begot sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons, and give your daughters to husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters, that ye may be increased there and not diminished. So, because of the Israelites was under strict, they was under the law of Moses. They broke the law of Moses. When you read the Old Testament, it talks about how they're going to watch their children given to people and their wives given to people. The Israelites will take on, and what we see in the DNA, they took on foreign wives. And when they took on foreign wives, those foreign wives that you see is what we see on the maternal side. And that's why we begin to look at the people that are on their, like for instance, when we look at the Koshin Jews, I got an abstract from the Koshin Jews, which is a form of small and unique community on the Malabar coast in southwest India. Those Jews look just like the people that's of India, but they are Jews that say that they came up out of the first diaspora, the first temple. They stayed there. They never experienced a 70 AD. They stayed there. Matter of fact, what's interesting is because when 1948 took place, guess when they started coming back? When that prophecy took place. Now, most people say, well, 1948 is not a prophecy or whatever case may be, from whether it's Black Hebrew Israelites, Christians, someone believe that. And that's cool. I don't hold them for that. But when you read Zechariah 14, when Christ comes back to the land in Zechariah 14, somebody is in that land that he's gathering people all against Jerusalem to fight there. And it says that he will come and save them. Who's in that land? And if you want to talk about politics or whatever case may be, what happened with the 1948 thing, politicking was happening with God when it happened with Cyrus. When you read the Cyrus cylinder, Israel was not the only people that Cyrus told that they can go back and build their temple. He told the people of Babylon that they can build that temple unto Marduk, which is a false god. So, I'm sorry.
So, hey, G-Con, have you ever heard of this Native Americans were like speaking Hebrew and pre-contact thing? This is one of the trolls that was on my show after Joe left, like going off hard, and I actually hoped he would come back on here. I think he's like a Mormon or something. I don't know, but he was giving me links to these books from like 1830 written by like Barbara Ann something. So like, yeah, could you like address that? Because I don't even really know what he's talking about or how to answer his question.
Did you want to address that, Vocab, or did you want me to?
Yeah, well, let me talk a little bit about it. Maybe you'll say it.
It looks like Vocab wants to say something about it.
Right.
So you notice, so we're discussing genetics, especially as it relates to people, not just, but a lot on the African continent. Now, G-Con just mentioned the Indian Jews. I mentioned them earlier. I just said the Jews in India. I couldn't remember. I just talked about them. So we're saying the same thing about that right there. But now we're talking about linguistic similarities, and it's with Native Americans, right? And so what you had happening is a few things.
So now they're talking about language. So I'm going to leave it there for the moment, family. But I promise you, this will get revisited by the Gap Gang on a thorough review. I'm definitely going to seek out G-Con and Vocab for a conversation about genetics. And try to squash all this nonsense, and really paint the full picture. So this false, I'm really getting stuck on this false dichotomy, family. I'm not gonna lie to you, Vocab. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm feeling some kind of way about the false dichotomy, because you're too smart to keep painting it. You know too much, and you know too many people who know enough to know that this false dichotomy is a false dichotomy. So I appreciate y'all for tuning in. I appreciate y'all for going through this catharsis with me, because I'm definitely getting some stuff out of my system, trying to figure this stuff out. And because I still got it irking in my spirit. I got maybe one or two more of these in me. I can feel it. Trying to get to the bottom of some stuff and just really just properly identify what's going on here. But with that, family, I appreciate y'all for coming through. And with that, I say peace and love.
I like the way this feel, yeah. Let my soul cry, yeah. Minister, we gonna speak from the heart on this one. I'm performing lyrical funerals, no obituary. I killed your boy and brought him back to life. Pet cemetery. My anointing not based on attendance at a seminary. Scarlet witches, they attracted to the visionary. Everywhere I go, I bring the word with me, missionary. Soldier drafted in the war machine, military. Pay attention, what I'm saying to you, legendary. You got the demeanor of a front desk secretary. That mean you take the calls calls, but you don't make the calls. That's why you hate, cause ain't nothing fake about me at all. Now I dare you try to say that with a straight face. My delivery in tip-top great shape. I'm too advanced for you, light years, space age. No evolution for you cavemen, stone age. I'm a thoroughbred, rock solid. I came from the bottom to the top, rock climbing. I grew up in the hood, pros and cons. That's that full court pressure when the ambulance roll out their stretch. Why can't you see it's not logical? If you live diabolical, boy, your point of view smaller than the hair follicle molecule. This for all of them that follow you, smoking all of them barbecue. When I pull up, your voice on correct itself with no auto-tune. I got a whole nother level that I can enter whenever I gotta deal with the devil. I pick a whole nother method. I hear a whole lot of yapping. They wanna see my reaction. I'm really out here in the community making it happen. I don't really think they understand the dilemma. They ain't looking at the man in the mirror. Can't say it in the clearer. The plan is very simple. It's time to start playing in the temple. Before somebody come and put the can on your temple. Reaching like a baby with his hand for the nipple. The Grand Reaper coming with his hand on the circle. In the van coming with a ram with it. With the van coming get him. I am so glad that I changed up. Made it out of where I came from. Watch for the sliding hook of the slow ball, fastball, and that change up. That ghetto lifestyle, it changed us. Go back to visit, it ain't changed much. Only difference is now the way that my brain process information. And Satan, been after my license day one. Let me say something. Only reason that I'm still alive today because God's grace is amazing. Just another raisin in the sun. Dream deferred when things occurred. Now you getting served right on the curb like a lemonade stand. I just gave you the benediction, let the whole church say amen.